thank you everybody for joining us. I'd like to say a big thank you to Jackie also for joining us today to do this presentation for you. Jackie's obviously one of our awesome learning facilitators, and she's also the representative for ARONAH. So I'm going to hand you over to Jackie, and she can explain everything that you need to know about naturopathy world. Okay, enjoy.
Thank you. Hi everyone, and thank you so much for taking time today to listen to my presentation on the challenges and opportunities for naturopathic registration. Just a little bit of background about myself. I'm a naturopath. I've been in practice for 13 years and I'm the chair of ARONAH. So I've been on the ARONAH board since 2012 and I've been chair for probably about 4 years now. And do lots of amazing work, get to meet some amazing naturopaths around the world and around Australia, and always striving to look for registration opportunities for naturopaths and Western herbal medicine practitioners. So today we'll be talking about this in much more detail. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat and I'll look at them at the end. But I'll run through, it will be a full hour, so it's a lot to get through. So I'll run through the questions at the end. Okay. All right, so today we'll be talking about the difference between statutory registration, self-regulation, which is sort of what we used to have, and we still do have that a little bit as well for naturopaths, and state-based regulation, which is what we have at the moment in Australia. Look at that in a lot of detail. We'll also be looking at how statutory registration works in Australia. So I'll go into a lot of detail about exactly what it is, because there's often a lot of questions around that. And then we'll talk about the benefits to naturopathy for registration and the risks if we don't get it. So, there's obviously a bias in this presentation that I'm very pro-registration, and so we'll be talking about the benefits of that and the risks if we don't. I'll briefly go through the history of statutory registration for naturopaths in Australia at the end, and then we'll talk about where to from here as well. So let's explore the regulatory options that we have. So self-regulation is what we used to have predominantly for many years in Australia. We still do have it to some degree, but before the state-based regulation was introduced, self-regulation as a profession was the main thing that we had. So self-regulation is when a profession regulates itself without any influence from external bodies. So there's no, no one else sort of coming in to help to regulate. Now, the problem with that is, and this is where an association would be the regulator. So, for example, if someone has a complaint made against them as a practitioner, they would go to the association that practitioner is a member of, and then the association investigate that and make a finding. Now, the problem with that is that there is an internal sort of conflict there. There's a conflict of interest because the main point, or one of the main roles that the associations hold, is that they help to promote and really sort of talk about the benefits of the profession and help to really support the profession in that way. If they're then investigating complaints, there's a dual role there. There is a conflict of interest where they're promoting the profession and standing behind the profession, but at the same time, then they're investigating complaints. So that can be a problem there with a bias. So about probably 5 years ago, state-based regulation was brought in. So in Victoria, we have the HCC, which is the Health Complaints Commissioner. in New South Wales, there's the HCCC, which is the Healthcare Complaints Commissioner. There's various ombudsmen around Australia. Queensland have an ombudsman, other states have ombudsmen. So every state is different with the way they regulate unregulated or unregistered professions. And this is like a big umbrella. It's a government department in each state in Australia. And yeah, every one of them works a little bit differently. So there's different rules for different states. We've seen this a lot actually with COVID, how different states have different rules for, you know, how healthcare practitioners are seen and that sort of thing. So it is difficult to navigate sometimes all those differences. And the problem with that is that the state-based regulation doesn't have any input from the profession that they're overseeing. So they, if someone complains, say they complain about an in Victoria, it would go to the HCCC, and then that person, or, you know, you would assign it to someone in that department, and then they would investigate that complaint. Now they would investigate it with the practitioner as well as the person that complained, so there's a fairness there. However, there's no input from the profession itself, so the person that is investigating doesn't necessarily have any background in health. So it could be, you know, they could be a lawyer, they could be an accountant, you know, it could be anyone working in that actual health department. Now I've noticed Ken's put his hand up. Is this a particular question, or is there a problem with my audio or something? Not sure. I'll leave all questions to the end, but I'm assuming everyone can hear me okay. My connection seems good. My connection looks good on my end, so I'm just going to keep going. If you have any questions, please ask at the end, and we'll definitely get to them all then. Okay, so with the state-based regulation, it doesn't have any input from the profession. So basically someone who is not part of the profession gets to decide the outcome. Now, I would prefer that someone from my own profession decide my outcome, because they know the intricacies of that profession. The third model, which is obviously the one ARONAH is very pro, is statutory registration. So this is where the profession is regulated by the government, and it's through legislation and definitions that the government have set. The good thing about that is that there is a barrier or a boundary between the profession and the complainant. So it's an independent process. But also there's a board of peers that help to sort of decide outcomes for that particular complaint. The board of peers also consults widely with the profession to set the standards. So they have education standards, they have competency standards, they have ethical guidelines. And so all of that is created within the profession for the profession. And that's only present with statutory registration. All right. So if you want to know more about the real details behind this, the sort of the different models, there's a great article written by John Wardle, Amy Steele and Erica McIntyre, and it's available freely on the NHAA website. And even though it was written in 2013, it's still really relevant. So if you are interested in knowing more details, I highly recommend you have a look at the NHAA website and download this article. John Wardle is now at Southern Cross University, and Amy Steele is, she's on the ARONAH board, so she's our deputy chair. She's knowledgeable, and Erica McIntyre is a well-known researcher in naturopathic medicine as well. So very highly qualified people have written this article. Okay, so let's have a look at what actually statutory registration looks like in Australia. Okay, so if you want to cure your insomnia, I highly recommend you get on the APRA website and have a read about how they were formed. It's a very long and involved process, and things change all the time in government. Anyway, as the chair of ARONAH, I've had to sort of get across all this, but things change all the time. So, for example, COAG actually formed the registration process, but now it's known as the National Federation Reform Council. So, you know, things change all the time. Departments change their names in government all the time. So anyway, what happened was in 2007, I think, or 2008, the COAG, which is the sort of the arm of the government, decided that we needed a uniform government body to oversee all of the professions, all the health professions in Australia. Before that time, every state had their own systems. In different states, different professions were regulated and registered, and so it was pretty messy. You know, you could be a profession in South Australia and then you move to Victoria and they've got a different system. So the government said, look, we need a uniform approach, and so they passed a law act. So it was the Health Practitioners Regulation National Law Act in 2009, and that basically said that there's a whole group of professions that need to be regulated in Australia. So under that law act, the National Registration and Accreditation Scheme, which is called NRAS, they were formed, and that is the scheme that basically looks after all of the professions. Now, at the moment, there are 15 professions that are registered in Australia, health professions, and those were taken from the different states that were, you know, where they were registered. So, for example, in Victoria, chiropractors were registered, so therefore chiropractors are under the national scheme. They all automatically included under that scheme. So the department agency that look after this is APRA, which is the Australian Health Practitioner Regulation Agency, and APRA work in conjunction with the professional boards to basically look after all of the different professions that are registered in Australia. Now, the professional boards are also sort of part of this process. So each profession has a board of peers that was established to look after this as well. So, and I'll go into more detail about the board and how that looks in a couple of slides' time. Now, I was actually looking on the APRA website the other day, preparing and updating this talk, and they have got a really pretty little infographic here. So I've borrowed that from their website, and I've put the little citation down the bottom there. But the National Registration and Accreditation Scheme is in the center, and you can see all of the things they do. So they actually, I'm going to see if I can get my little pen working here, draw some arrows. But the couple of things that I want to draw your attention to is, firstly, the aim of APRA is to protect the public. And the aim of the boards, the whole point of registration and regulation is that the public is protected from harm as much as possible from those different health professions. So that's one of the main aims. They have as at the National Online Register. So they have basically published an online register. So you can look up, you can go onto the APRA website and look up to see if your your health professional is on the register. So all of the 15 different professions, so we're looking at medical doctors, we're looking at chiropractors, osteopaths, psychologists, nurses, midwives, physiotherapists, dentists. There's so many different professions of the 15. I've just named a few, but you can look up, you know, I go see an osteopath myself. I could look up to see if she's registered under APRA. So everyone needs to be listed on the register, and they maintain that register. The other really important thing that they do is they have accreditation in training and education. So what they do is they make sure that the degree that this health professional actually undertakes is accredited and is, you know, teaching the person what they need to know, basically. So there's a whole a huge part of the National Accreditation Scheme, or NRAS, is all about making sure that the education standards of that profession are proper, and that there's also competency standards for that profession as well, so that you know that when you go to your doctor, you assume they have a medical degree and they're competent in a whole heap of things, and they also abide by ethical guidelines for that profession, so you know that that person is, you know, appropriately qualified. So this is what happens with those 15 professions. However, there are a whole heap of registered professions in Australia. Naturopaths and herbalists are part of that, that do not have this system and don't come under the NRAS at all. So what does statutory registration look like? So we get quite a few questions about you know, people saying, oh, I don't want the government to be big brother and look out for us, you know, look over us and things like that. And it's actually not like that at all. It's basically, it provides a framework that the profession can make sure they fit into. So the first thing, and probably the biggest benefit for a profession, like obviously the public gets protected, but for the profession, the best benefit for registration is protection of title. So it means that if I want to train as, say, I want to be a psychologist, I can't use the word or the title psychologist. I have an appropriate qualification in that profession, and I'm registered with APRA. So I cannot use that title. And if you do, you know, you'll have some consequences. So the protection of title is one of the biggest benefits. It means that people can't call themselves a naturopath unless they are one. And what happens a lot of the time is that professions, other professions who may have been you know, had disciplinary proceedings undertake that have been undertaken for them, they will leave that profession and they adopt the title of naturopath. And as the ARONAH chair, we see this all the time, that, you know, a nurse or a medical doctor, you know, for whatever reason is no longer allowed to practice. Now, it doesn't happen very often. You have to some pretty bad stuff in order to be taken out of that profession, and they say you can no longer practice. However, it does happen every now and then. And so what happens more times than not is that they'll say, okay, well, I'm no longer a medical doctor, but I'm going to call myself a naturopath. And there's a few famous cases in Australia, particularly there's one with a nurse who adopted the title of naturopath, and then consequently, you know, she was no longer allowed to be a nurse. She's become a naturopath, and then she's done some pretty full-on things as a naturopath as well. The thing that it doesn't do is it doesn't define our scope of practice, and I'll talk about this in much more detail later, but the biggest take-home message is that the government doesn't really care how we treat people They don't care if we use particular herbs or, you know, lifestyle recommendations or whatever it is. They just want to make sure we're safe in doing that, and we do it within our own scope of practice. So they don't define the scope of practice. And if you look at ARONAH's website, we have our website has a whole heap of documents. We basically try and mirror APRA wherever we can. So we've got documents on everything. And one of those is scope of practice and competency standards is what it's called. So if you want to have a look at that, feel free. And you might cure your insomnia as well, because it's a pretty dry document, but it's important to have it written down. The other thing that determines registration is the need for registration. So we need to look at whether the actual profession is at any risk of harming the public if they're unqualified. So this was determined actually back in 2005. The Victorian government wrote a report on the whether naturopaths and Western herbal medicine practitioners needed to be regulated and registered. And so they had this report. It was commissioned by the La Trobe University, and it's colloquially known as the Lynn Report. You can download that from the ARONAH website as well. It's about 500 pages, but it outlines, it sort of looked at the entire profession and outlines various reasons why or why not we need to be regulated and registered. And basically they came to the conclusion that yes, naturopaths and Western herbal medicine practitioners should be registered. That happened back in 2005, and then nothing sort of happened from there. And so this is where ARONAH has come in, and we established ourselves and have been lobbying for this ever since. The other thing that statutory registration does is it has a minimum level of education standards. So it has basically, they outline what is the minimum level of education that this person as a practitioner needs to have. Now, every single primary healthcare practitioner practitioner in Australia has a degree. It might not be a medical degree. It's a degree in whatever profession they are. So if you're a chiropractor, it would be a chiropractic degree. If you're a nurse, it's a nursing degree. And so they have this, minimum level of education. The other thing that the government that we often sort of get questions about is, the government's, they hate naturopaths, or they hate complementary medicine in general, and they're gonna want to punish people and that sort of stuff. It's actually not about that. It's not about punishing and the legal system sort of, you get taken to court and you get a sentence handed down to you. It's not about that. What it is, it's about protecting the public. So if a complaint is made about a practitioner who is registered, then what happens is the government seek to protect the public. So they're not going to necessarily come down very hard on the practitioner. What they're going to do is the minimum required to protect that member of public. So they look at protecting, not punishing, not punitive. Part of that is the next point, is that they're educative, not exclusionary. So what they will do is they will educate the practitioner on what they can and can't do if they've had a complaint made against them and they've breached some sort of ethical guideline or some sort of issue with safety. They'll educate that practitioner around that. So it might be something as simple as, someone says on their website that they can cure diabetes. You're not allowed to say that. Someone with diabetes goes to that practitioner thinking they're going to get cured. They don't get cured. They make a complaint. And then it's all about, okay, well, that person needs to modify their website, say that they can't cure people, but they can help you know, with blood sugar levels in people who have diabetes or something like that. The other thing they do when we are, if we do get registered, but anytime a profession is registered, they do probity checks. So this is proactive, not reactive. So what they do is, if a new profession is registered, so this happened recently with paramedics, they will check everybody's qualifications. So you apply to the register, and they will check that you have an appropriate qualification from their list of qualifications. They will check that you have insurance, that you have first aid, that you have all those things that we have to do for associations. They actually check all of that. At the moment, you don't need to be a member of an association. You don't need to have any education or any insurance or any first aid behind you to work as a naturopath or a herbalist. And so it's very reactive as a system. So, you know, it only gets changed if someone makes a complaint about you and that complaint is upheld. So having registration is being proactive is actually really beneficial. The final thing, which is probably equally as important as any other, is a procedural fairness. So what happens if you do have a complaint made against you is that there's a fairness around that complaint. So you get to have your say, the person who's complaining gets to have their say, you get to counter argue and go back and forth, and there is a real openness and fairness to the system. If we have self-regulation, there's no real fairness around that system. Okay, now we'll have a look at the risks and benefits for the naturopathic profession. So firstly, we'll talk about who decides and look at the benefits or the differences between the two systems there. We're going to look at something called grandparenting, which is the inclusion of long-standing practitioners. We'll look a little bit at advertising and scope of practice, and we'll also look at medico-legal implications, which sounds a bit jargony, but is actually super interesting, I think. Right. So if you have a complaint made against you right now in Australia, the first thing they'll say is, okay, who's the profession? What profession are they? And then that determines where the complaint goes. So if you are, let's say you're a dentist and a complaint is made against you, that will go to the Complaints Authority, which is the NRAS, which then APRA fall under that. That complaint will be heard by the professional board, so it will be heard by the dentist board, and then there's procedural fairness around that. So they'll have information from the person who is complaining, they'll have information from the person who is being complained about, and all of that is very open and transparent. And the board of peers, that professional board, will decide the outcome of that. Now, there's also you know, the expertise from within the profession is quite big, because it they have the board of peers, and they may consult further, you know, within the profession as well. So it's certainly something that, you know, is very open, transparent, and sort of the profession itself will decide on the complaint. Now, if you have a complaint against you as, let's say, you're a naturopath or a herbalist, you are classified as an unregistered profession. So that will go to, again, it will go to a complaints authority, but that authority is a state-based authority. So if you're in Queensland, it'll go to the Ombudsman. If you're in New South Wales, it'll go to the HCCC, etc. So whatever the complaints authority is, they will, again, hear the complaint. You will get your say, and the person complaining also gets their say. However, the person who decides the outcome of that is going to be someone working in the department that is the authority. So it'll be someone working in the HCCC, for example. they can confer with the profession, but they don't have to. So they don't have to ask, is this, what you guys do, or is this okay in your profession? They don't have a set of standards that are specific for that profession. It's a very generalized standards that encompass all unregulated and unregistered health professions. So it is not something that is specific to the profession. What they tend to do is they defer to conventional medical standards, and this can be problematic because naturopaths are not the same as doctors, and so we shouldn't be held to the same standards as a medical doctor would be held to. Now, all of this can happen and there's no expertise within the profession, while this complaint is being made. So that I think is problematic. I mean, myself personally, I would prefer to be judged by a board of my own peers if I had a complaint made against me versus someone who doesn't know what a naturopath does on an intricate level. Okay, so we'll look more closely at the boards. The boards, the professional boards for each of these 15 professions that are registered. It's actually a really good sort of way they've set up. So they have a minimum of 9 members from around Australia. No more than 2/3, but at least a half need to be of that profession. So if you're on the medical board of Australia, most of the members will be doctors or medical professionals. We have someone from every state around Australia. So there's a representation from Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, Western Australia, South Australia. No less than 1 member from Tasmania, ACT, Northern Territory. That's purely based on population. So they combine the seats of Tasmania, ACT and Northern Territory. But every other state gets an individual member. They also have community members as well, and I suppose this is sort of like passing the pub test, and so they have at least 2 community members on each board, and they have at least 1 person from a regional or rural area in Australia. So it is a pretty good system as far as the representation goes. Now with ARONAH, we try and mirror this as much as we can. So we have representation from New South Wales, Queensland, Victoria, Western Australia and South Australia. We've never been able to get anyone from Tasmania, ACT, Northern Territory. So if any of you are practitioners and you are, practicing in those areas of Australia and you want to be on the board of ARONAH, please let me know, and I'll send your resume off to our external committee to assess. But we always try to mirror APRA as much as we can. So we do have 2 community members as well, and we try to maintain this, similar to APRA, similar to the professional boards. Now, this slide is included because after I say all of that, often people will say things like, well, that sounds all okay, but I'd still rather not have the government, look after us. Why can't we just be like the dietitians? And the amount of times I get asked this question, I would love to have $1 for every time I get asked it, because I think running ARONAH, like I'd donate that $1 to ARONAH, and running ARONAH would be much easier. So what happens with the dietitians is the dietitians are not a regulated profession. They are not under APRA, and this is often held up by people who are anti-registration. They sort of say, let's be like the dietitians. So how the dietitians model works is it's got one association, which is the Dietetics Association of Australia, and they have a lot of power. So they trademarked the name accrediting practicing dietitian. And so if you are a member of their association, you can use that title of accredited practicing dietitian. With that comes a whole heap of things like Medicare, rebates, private health insurance, and things like that. Now, back in 2015, there was a dietitian, Jennifer Elliott, and she has been a dietitian for 35 years, very experienced, and she was recommending low-carb diets for her patients with type 2 diabetes. She'd been doing that for about 10 years, and someone complained to the Dietetics Association of Australia. They complained to them about her using those particular diets. Now, they did an inquiry into her use of the low-carb diets and found that there was no evidence for these diets, even though the American Dietetics Association actually recommends use of these diets. They found there was no evidence, so she was deregistered as part of the DAA in 2015. Now, the problem that happened with that is that she had no recourse for appeal, so she wasn't able to appeal the decision. There was no transparency in the process at all. She didn't know what was happening, and the sort of information about how the decision process was undertaken. There was no real reason given other than she was prescribing low-carb diets. And because she was deregistered from that association, she lost her job at the public health institute. She was working for like a district health, and she lost her job there. She lost her Medicare recognition, and she lost her private health insurance recognition as well. Now, this is problematic because the association, for one, it's a self-regulation model. So there's no barrier between the profession and the board. It's, you know, the association which promotes the profession is actually undertaking this disciplinary action. And also there was no like transparency in the process. If this happened under APRA, well, firstly, this would never happen under APRA. And it's for a couple of reasons. So the first reason is that APRA have a transparent process. They have the board is independent of the profession, and the purpose of that board is to protect the public. And that's their aim. So they are independent. They're representing everyone from around Australia, and they have their the complaint is measured against the standards that are written for that profession. So, you know, we have competency standards, and we have ethical guidelines and things like that. And so that's what's used to measure the complaint. So the independence around the decision making is very strong. The other reason why it wouldn't happen under APRA is that now I've just lost my train of thought. The scope of practice is not that specific. So if you have a look on APRA's website, and again, if you have insomnia, you can cure it by reading some of these documents because they're very long and very dry and put you to sleep. But if you read the competency standards for most professions, they're very broad on purpose. They don't define, you know, you can use this technique or that technique, but you can't use this other one. You know, like you know, you can't use this herb or that herb, or you can't use homeopathy, but you can use bark flowers. Like it's not like that. It's very broad on purpose. So, and that's because we don't want to narrow the profession at all. And particularly with naturopathy, we are such a broad brush stroke as a profession. Like we really are wonderfully eclectic, I think, and that's probably one of our huge strengths. But that the scope of practice that we have is broad for a reason. So, and ARONAH has written all these documents for naturopathy. So if you want to have a look at them, feel free to look on our website as well. They are due to be updated, and it's on my very big to-do list to get all of these updated as well. Okay. Now, we'll talk about grandparenting here. It's the inclusion of long-standing practitioners. So basically, one of the questions we often get asked at ARONAH is, you know, people might say, I don't want registration because I've been a naturopath for 30 years. I don't have a degree. You know, I'm not going to meet your minimum level of education. I don't want to upgrade my degree. You know, I've got 30 years experience. I don't need to update my degree. And I would say, I absolutely agree with you. So what we have is grandparenting guidelines. So anytime a new profession is admitted into the NRAS, the grandparenting guidelines come into play. So there's different tiers of membership. So for example, tier A is someone who meets the current training requirements. So anyone, if we were to get registered tomorrow, anyone who has a bachelor degree in naturopathy would automatically be included. If you have something like an advanced diploma or a diploma, then you might come under tier B and C. So tier B would be that whatever qualification you have that's not the bachelor still meets the minimum training requirements and has 200 hours of clinical supervision or 2 years of clinical practice. Tier C would be that we're uncertain of the training requirements. Perhaps it was a diploma from 30 years ago. We don't know exactly what was taught in that diploma, but they've been practicing for 5 years out of the last 10 years. They would still be included as well. So basically what happens is they try and include as many people as possible in that first sort of intake of the profession being registered. And then and as people join later on, it gets more defined. In other words, the bachelor would be the minimum level. The best example of this happening is with nursing. So back, you know, in the 60s and 70s, and probably even earlier than that, nursing was something that people would go to a nursing college for a few weeks, learn some basics, and then they go off to the hospital and they learn on the job. And so, you know, a nurse that was trained in the 1970s wouldn't necessarily have a degree, but she has 40 years experience as a nurse and she learnt on the job. So all of those nurses were encompassed under the grandparenting guidelines and included when nursing was a registered profession. Okay, the other question we often get is under advertising. And advertising, you know, people often say, oh, I don't want to be registered because I don't want to be told what I can and can't say in any ads. And that's actually not the case. This is relevant for everybody as a health practitioner. So it's underpinned by consumer law. So you basically, everybody needs to be compliant with this, no matter if we're registered or not. So the main, I suppose, take-home message is that you can't make a complaint and make a claim that you can't justify it with evidence. So you can't say that you're going to cure something, you can't say you're going to get rid of chronic illness or anything like that, but you can say that you can help to treat that, or you can help support the body. One of the big things is we can't say that we treat COVID-19. That's one of the big ones. Cancer is another one, diabetes. So a lot of major health issues. So we can't say we're going to cure those illnesses, but we can say that we can help support the immune system and things like that. So the law applies to everybody as a health practitioner, whether you are registered or not. But the benefit of being registered is that each board provides guidelines for their profession to assist with the interpretation of the law. So specifically to, you know, chiropractic or specifically to medical profession, that gets you know, written, the guidelines get written to help that profession navigate the law. Now, under unregistered practitioners, you know, we don't have that at all. So it's something that would be an advantage if we were registered. Now, a little slide about evidence, because we're talking about, you know, you have to have justifiable evidence for saying a claim, like, you know, saying that you know, treating a particular illness. One good thing is that traditional evidence is increasingly being seen as a valid form of evidence. So this is good. So courts actually will take traditional evidence on board. A good example of that was there was a case, it was actually in the UK, and it was against a TCM, or traditional Chinese medicine practitioner. His name was Dr. Situ, and he was taken to court by Mr. Shakur's family. Now, unfortunately, under Dr. Situ's care, Mr. Shakur passed away, he died, and it was because he had a reaction to a particular herbal mix that Dr. Situ had given him. Now, Dr. Situ, oh, sorry, there's a bug flying in my face. Dr. Situ had used this particular herbal mix many, many times. He had used it over decades as this particular herbal mix. And for some reason, his patient, Mr. Sakua, had an idiosyncratic reaction to that that was unpredictable, ended up having liver failure and died as a result, which was very unfortunate. However, the court ruled in favour of Dr. Situ because he had used this particular herbal mix for many years. There was lots of evidence for it, and it was seen as, you know, a legitimate treatment for that patient. And so it's just good to know that the traditional evidence is seen as a valid form of evidence in the court, if it ever comes to that. Okay, scope of practice. This is probably the most common question we get at ARONAH, and I love illustrating this with my favorite Simpsons episode when Homer Simpson decides he's a chiropractor and he's going to cure Lenny's back pain by flinging him over the garbage can. The thing with scope of practice is that it's defined by the profession, and the boundaries of scope of practice are broad. So the scope of practice is based on the education standards of the profession and also the competency standards, which are broad on purpose. Now, Simpson clearly does not have any education or competency standards behind him. You know, so he wouldn't be falling under his own scope of practice. And that's the same with naturopaths. We get to decide what our scope of practice is. So for example, for myself, you know, I studied 13 years ago. When I studied, I didn't learn anything about the genetic testing that goes on in Australia, and I still don't really know about the genetic testing. So I'm not going to interpret genetic reports for my patients. I'm not going to recommend they go and get genetic testing because I don't feel I'm competent in that area. However, I have colleagues who are super competent in this. They've done extra training under their professional development. They have been mentored by people and they really know what they're doing. So they are super competent and it's part of their scope of practice. Similarly, you know, 10 years ago or more, naturopaths, when they trained, they learned massage. So that would be part of your scope of practice if you learnt massage as part of your training. I didn't learn massage, so I'm not going to start massaging my patients. because it's beyond my scope of practice. So this is, you know, something that you decide as a practitioner what your scope of practice is. If you have sufficient training in that area and in your undergraduate training, but also in your CPD, then your scope of practice is fine. Okay, I'm just looking at the time. I've got to start speeding up. Protections and medico-legal implications. So with statutory registration, what happens is the person who refers is protected. So in other words, as an example, if you go to a doctor and you have back pain and the doctor says, okay, I think you would benefit from a chiropractic or osteopathic adjustment. So I'm going to refer you to the chiropractor that I know well, and then you can go see them and fix your back pain that way. The referral there's no issues with that referral because the doctor is a medical professional. He's referring to a fellow registered professional who has a level of education and experience and competency standards around that profession. So if anything goes wrong in that referral, then it's got nothing to do with the doctor because he's referred to someone, within the registered professionals. If a doctor refers to a naturopath, however, and something happens in that treatment and something goes wrong and the person sues the naturopath, the doctor can actually be held liable for that because they made the initial referral. And that's because they're referring to a profession that is not registered. It doesn't have any competency or education standards around it. And so therefore that doctor is liable for that referral. So you can sort of see why doctors are a little bit hesitant in referring to naturopaths and herbalists. The other thing that it does is it protects organisations that might benefit from having a naturopath working for them. So employers, private health insurance companies, wouldn't we all love to have a naturopath working at private health insurance companies at the moment and have some say? But government agencies, other health services, all of these will be protected because there's a minimum level of education around hiring that naturopath on their team. Okay, now history of statutory registration. Now I'm going to go through this quite quickly. There's a lot of info here, so apologies. There's lots of writing, but I'm not going to read out all of it. Basically, registration was first discussed in Parliament in Australia in 1927. So it's actually been going on for nearly 100 years. It's a long time. In 1975, a Victorian committee recommended registration for naturopathy and that they should be taught at a university degree level. So 1975 was when we started talking about degrees for naturopaths, which is quite a long time ago. And I love this one, 1978, a Commonwealth inquiry into naturopathy found that herbal medicine was not effective, and the report says that the thoroughness with which the pharmaceutical industry has surveyed the global flora for pharmacologically active substances renders the probability of any significant range of effective herbal medicine most unlikely. Now, that was in 1978. I was born in 1978. I'm so glad we've come a long way since then. Yeah, it's funny reading back through these different inquiries and things that have gone on. Now, in the 80s, we had registration for naturopaths happened in 1984 in the Northern Territory. So naturopaths were registered in the Northern Territory for a few years. And in 1989, the first university degree course was developed in the Northern Territory as well. Unfortunately, that never went ahead, but it was certainly developed back in 1989. And then sorry, my pictures are over the top of the heading there. So this is in the 90s. We've got Spice Girls. You can see my taste in music. In the 90s, we had, so a few things happened in Northern Territory, and naturopaths were deregistered in the Northern Territory back in 1992. And in 1998, there was a health training package which was basically encompassing advanced diplomas. Now, this is already after the degree was in place, but the health training package is talking about advanced diplomas, and they redefined naturopathy as herbs and nutrition and homeopathy or massage. And they actually removed the requirement for naturopathic philosophy to be taught in the advanced diplomas. So a lot of the time, people who are hesitant about us having a degree as a minimum standard, because that's our minimum standard in Australia, is our degree, who are hesitant about that say, oh, you know, the degree is too scientific, and you know, there's no history and philosophy taught, and there's no traditional stuff taught. And it's actually not the case. It was actually the advanced diplomas who had that removed, and the degrees actually put it back in. So there's a bit of misinformation there. In the 2000s, the most important thing that happened was the report, which I mentioned earlier, the Lynn report, which was the Victorian Inquiry into Regulatory Requirements for Naturopathy and Western Herbal Medicine. That was written in 2005, and it recommended that naturopaths be registered. And the government began the legislative process. However, that was stopped, and COAG was formed, and then everything was sort of held up from there. And then recently we've had lots of things happening. So in 2015, the World Naturopathic Federation was formed, and they have been an amazing global force to help promote naturopathy worldwide, including helping countries have naturopaths registered and regulated within countries across the world. So that's a key moment recently. And 2019 in Australia, we had naturopaths excluded from private health insurance rebates. I'll talk more about that on the next slide, but certainly a big moment in our profession. 2019 also, we formed the Australian Naturopathic Council, and that incorporates ARONAH, NHAA, CMA, which is the Complementary Medicine Association, Torrens University, Endeavour College. So all of the Australian members of the World Naturopathic Federation are part of the Naturopathic Council, and we work really well together as a united force to lobby government for registration. That's one of the things we do. We do lots of other things as well. And then huge news just recently, the health technology assessment was released by the World Naturopathic Federation. Now, the health technology assessment is basically a worldwide document on everything that you could possibly think of to do with naturopathy. It is a total game changer. It's about 700 pages. It was written, one of the ARONAH board members was involved in writing it, Amy Steele, and certainly is going to be huge for when we do lobby for registration. We're going to have this 700-page document to say, here's all the reasons why naturopaths are awesome and why we need to be registered. So it's absolutely massive. Anyway, if you want to download it, it's free to download on the World Naturopathic Federation website. So I highly recommend you do that. Private health insurance rebates. So they were removed in 2019 after a review of the evidence. They said there was no evidence for naturopathy, and we all just went, what? And so then a week later, they said, oh, okay, we'll review it, even though ARONAH and others had been lobbying for years before we were removed to say, don't remove us. They didn't listen. Anyway, we had a meeting with the private health insurance department in 2019, and they were super interested in what we had to say. And it was going to be finalized, this review was going to be finalized in June 2020, but obviously a global pandemic has happened in between now and then. It's still ongoing as of 2022. But since this time, we have assembled the evidence for naturopathy and Western herbal medicine, and certainly the health technology assessment is going to be part of that as well. So it's still ongoing, and we hope it will be resolved soon, but who knows. Okay, almost finished. Let's look to the future. What can statutory registration actually do for us? So it can increase the standards and accountability of the profession, which will increase public confidence, and it will also increase confidence from other health professionals. And what it does is it creates the infrastructure that helps policymakers include naturopathic ideas, practitioners are able to refer to naturopaths comfortably. And it gives us a seat at the table so that, you know, things like the removal of private health insurance rebates won't happen because we're actually room. You know, if we were registered, we would still have private health insurance rebates. It's without a doubt, there's no question about it. So no health professional that was registered in Australia had private health insurance rebates removed. There's also murmurings around removal of GST status or GST-free status for naturopaths and Western herbal medicine. So at the moment we can consult and we don't have to charge GST on that consultation. There's murmurings that that may be removed, so we hope not. But again, if we're not even allowed in the room, how can we, you know, argue for ourselves? ARONAH, we were established to provide minimum standards and education for education practice of naturopaths and Western herbal medicine practitioners. So we are an independent register that mirrors APRA as much as we can. We opened in 2013, and we have all the documents that, you know, I've been talking about. ARONAH has written them in consultation with the naturopathic community. We have just recently released our education and standards, released in 2021, and we're currently working with all of the colleges in Australia with those. And they are, you know, used by many other bodies for referral. So, for example, some of the professional associations actually use our standards as well. And we are also leading a naturopathic regulation research project, which is basically updating that LIN report. So the LIN report was written, I hate to say it, almost 20 years ago now. It's like 17 years ago or something. And so we need to update that report. We need to provide a current snapshot of the profession. So we are currently doing that. So we crowdfunded to do that a couple of years ago. It was mid-2020. We raised $20,000 within the profession to fund this project, because it's, you know, doesn't cost nothing to do all this research. So basically we're almost finished that. I think just about every chapter is into its end stages, so hopefully that will be released soon, and once we have that, then we can make an application to government for registration for naturopaths. Future, what would the future look like? Ideally, if I had a crystal ball, I would say that we would use direct transition of ARONAH infrastructure that we've been working on for the last 10 years into APRA. That's the ultimate goal. We've got all these steps that we've written, so it's like, here you go, here they are. But in order to do that, we have extensive lobbying for registration, and we need to sort of have this infrastructure now so that we can be prepared for when that happens. Naturopathic Council, Australian Naturopathic Council, we collaborate very regularly and are ongoing. We write government submissions to different things. We do lots of really good work all together. So ideally, we'll keep collaborating as well in the future. Alrighty, finally, shameless plug for ARONAH. If you'd like to join ARONAH, I assume a lot of you might be students listening, so we have free student membership. Please have a look at our website and send in your student membership. We would love to have you on board. If you are a practicing naturopath or herbalist, we would love for you to be a full member of ARONAH. Now, you do need to jump through a few hoops. So you need to supply proof of identity, you need to have a certified copy of your degree and insurance and first aid and things like that, association membership. All of the forms are on our website, and the reason why you have to have all these things is because we mirror APRA. So in order to join APRA, you need a certified copy of degree, and et cetera, et cetera. People find that a little bit hard, which I do understand, because it is a bit of work gathering all this stuff together. So if you would like to support ARONAH and add your voice, because we want your voice, we want the numbers behind us, then joining ARONAH as an associate member is another way to do it. So it means you don't have to provide any of the degrees, but you become a member, you financially support us, and you also add your voice to this important issue. And at a very minimum, please keep in touch with us via our Facebook page and our Naturopaths for Registration group. I'm one of the admins on that group, so if you want to join that Facebook group, this is a safe space for all discussions on registration. We let everybody in as well, even if you're anti-reg, that's absolutely fine. You can come into our group and have some robust discussions on that as well. And that is everything. So apologies, I've gone a little bit over time, but there's all our details, and I welcome your questions or comments. I know there's been a few that have come through, so I might open up the chat now so I can see different comments here. So
You've got 2 questions,
okay,
Jackie.
Sure. Just looking, so Christine has asked, when we are a registered profession, GPs will be protected and may refer to us with confidence. Yes, definitely that would be the case. So you know, there's no liability around that. Once we're registered, then absolutely GPs will be able to refer in confidence or with confidence. Someone else has asked, so Mel's asked, I'm not sure if you covered this in the beginning, and then the updates on vax mandates. Oops, that's just disappeared off me. For the industry as practitioners and clinical subjects at university. So yeah, vax mandates, as we all know, you can be mandated to be vaccinated regardless of registration status or not. That's basically to do with the fact that we're a federation. Every state is different in Australia as far as their decisions that they've made. So yeah, so that's a matter for state-based decision. So that's really got nothing to do with registration itself. All registered health professionals are mandated, but also many unregistered. So, you know, naturopaths are one of those. I know I'm in Victoria, it's mandated for us here, Queensland, Western Australia. I haven't really kept up with individual states, to be honest, but yeah, it's not a registration issue. It's more of a primary healthcare practitioner issue, which we are as naturopaths and herbalists. Okay, and there was a lovely comment there. Thank you for all the nice comments. Any other questions? Or yeah, we've got one more here. So with registration of the profession, government provides some funding like they do for GPs, where Medicare funds become part of the medical expenses for patients. Ideally love to be, yeah, us to be more accessible. That's a good question. I think, I mean, not going to get Medicare rebates if we're not registered. There's no way. So but I know lots of professions who are registered do have them. So obviously GPs have them, psychologists have them as part of a mental health plan, chiropractors and osteopaths. I think physios would come under this as well. You get certain sessions for free or Medicare rebate for part of that. So yeah, so that would be another big benefit. First things first is we need to get registered though. Do you think when we're registered we'll get the Medicare rebates? Look, I don't know, to be honest. It would probably depend on which government was in power and how much money they wanted to spend on health. But certainly we could argue a case that you know, people come to see naturopaths and herbalists as a primary healthcare practitioner sometimes before they go to their GP. I know we've got lots of, yeah, that's a loaded question. Who should we vote for? I won't answer that one. But yeah, you can contact your local member and ask them that question, and then they can tell you what their response is. And if, you know, if enough of us do that, if we write a letter to our local member, they'll realize it is an issue out there. So anyway, but yeah, look, we could definitely mount a case for Medicare rebates because we have people coming to see us first. I mean, a lot of my patients, you know, don't go to their GP, they come to see me instead of their GP, and then I'll refer them back to their GP, that sort of thing. So yeah, so anyway, it's a probably a 10-year plan. First we've got to get registered though. All the lovely comments there as well. Yeah, that's right. And yes, yeah, low income don't have private health insurance. That's exactly right. Yeah. Alrighty, thank you, and no problems. Yeah, and you know, if you have any questions, if you think later on, oh, I should have asked something about this, feel free to get into the Facebook group and ask your question there. Quite welcome to. I'm always happy to answer questions at any stage as well. All right, thanks so much for all your attention, and have a lovely rest of the day.